Heavy fighting in Yugoslavia as the truce collapses. Mr. Baker announces new curbs on political asylum. John Birt is the new BBC chief from 1993. And McEnroe goes out in traditional style. Good evening. Rebel forces in Slovenia are locked in battle with federal troops tonight after Yugoslavia's fragile truce collapsed today. Yugoslav warplanes bombed Slovene forces near the border with Croatia. Fighting was also reported on the Italian and Austrian borders. The other main developments: Yugoslavia says 10 of its soldiers have been killed and 13 wounded. Federal bombers attacked radio and TV transmitters, temporarily knocking out communications in Slovenia. And Slovenia offered a ceasefire at 2 o'clock this afternoon, but got no response from the Yugoslav army. This report from ITN's Robert Hall in Zagreb.
Contact north of the Slovenian border. Federal Air Force jets supporting ground forces as they began their advance towards Ljubljana. The tank columns had moved at speed from their barracks early this morning. There was little time for niceties, this village one of those assessing the damage after the tanks had passed. But less than a mile north of the border, the column was halted by fierce fire around the first of a series of barricades.
Look at the tank! They must go down! They must go down!
There were 2 trucks that were blocking the way, and for a while it was quiet. Then the barricade blew up. I don't know if it was hit or if it was mined. And then shortly after that, there was firing we heard from the woods, and the tanks moved in. The column moved in and started trying to go into to the left of the barricade.
The objective was this convoy, trapped for 5 days and taking heavy casualties. But the Slovenians have had time to prepare, and the federal thrust north has been slowed by roadblocks and counterfire. This is just what Croatia, Slovenia and the international community feared. The Federal High Command was warning only last night that direct threats against its forces would be met by what it termed massive retaliation. It does now seem that the Federal Army's patience has finally run out. The general commanding operations told me his orders had come from Yugoslav's presidency. His objective was to secure national borders and to reach trapped federal units. This afternoon, more reinforcements were still rolling out of Zagreb towards Ljubljana as the fighting spread. Tank fire seen on the Austrian border as other federal units tried to break through the militia, who demanded they leave without their weapons. The fragile peace in Yugoslavia has been shattered. Robert Hall, ITN, Zagreb.
Here, the Home Secretary announced new measures this afternoon to curb the number of people seeking asylum in Britain. There will be bigger fines for airlines who carry immigrants without visas and tighter controls at ports. Mr. Baker told the Commons he had an obligation to the British people to control immigration.
Nearly 1,000 people a week are currently seeking refugee status in Britain. That's overwhelmed the existing facilities and can lead to delays of over a year, while it's established whether or not the individual does have a genuine fear of persecution in their home country. And with long delays for those going through the normal immigration procedures to get into Britain, the Home Office fears some are claiming refugee status to jump the queue. The Home Secretary said all EC countries faced an increasing problem, particularly with the opening up of Eastern Europe.
I believe that the rapid rejection of a large number of unfounded claims and the early departure of those applicants from this country will play a major part in deterring further abuse of the process and allow us to tackle the dramatic growth in the number of applications.
Labour welcomed some of the measures, but cautioned
that it is equally important to ensure that genuine asylum seekers are not denied entry because of the obsession with keeping out bogus applicants.
And a group of Labour backbenchers disagreed fundamentally with the proposals.
I accuse the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister of creating a racist backlash by using the numbers game.
This policy applies to asylum seekers wherever they come from, whether they are black or white.
And the proposals have been given an added sense of urgency
by the arrival of up to 500,000 illegal immigrants a year in Western Europe. Mark Webster, ITN, Westminster.
BBC governors this afternoon chose the next Director General of the corporation. He's Mr John Birt, but he won't be taking over from the present Director General, Michael Checkland, until 1993. The announcement follows a rift among governors over who to choose between the two men.
It's been described as the most powerful broadcasting job in the world. It's at the peak of the British establishment, with patronage over 25,000 jobs and responsibility for everything from Derek Jameson's radio chat show to the entire television output, including news and current affairs. Michael Checkland was the first accountancy-trained person to hold the position, a surprise choice over several established broadcasters in 1987. He'd have liked another 5 years. But the man he himself appointed as deputy, John Birt, has assumed increasing powers. Observers say it was a bloody power battle among the governors.
Last night, on Monday night, they had a 7-hour meeting which went on into the small hours of the morning. A battle waging. I mean, there were various people very much supported Michael Checkland. Various governors are very keen, even threats, I understand, to resign if they didn't get their way. In a way, it's a bit of a face-saving exercise for Michael Checkland. He's been renewed for 1 more year, which is face-saving or could be seen as a bit of an insult to him.
John Birt will now fight the BBC's corner when its royal charter is next negotiated in 1996. Norman Rees, ITN, in central London.
American Air Force officials are today investigating how the wife and 2 children of a serviceman lay dead in their Cambridgeshire home for 10 days before being discovered. It's believed the children starved to death after their mother died from natural causes.
The Volker family's home was deserted today. Flowers left on the doorstep, the only clue to the terrible tragedy that claimed 3 lives. Inside, the kitchen tidied by Lorraine Volker before she collapsed and died, and everywhere signs of the 2 young girls, Galen aged 2 and 16-month-old Laura, who slowly starved to death just yards from a public road. The village is small, its few houses spread out. There were no milk or newspaper deliveries to the Volkers' rented cottage, but villagers are horrified that the girls' cries went unheard.
They're eating their hearts out over the fact that 2 children died of starvation next door to them.
At the Mildenhall Air Base, where Sergeant Volker, who discovered the bodies on his return from a mission, was being comforted today, the US Air Force said attempts had been made to check on the Volker family.
When no one answered the telephone, no suspicions were raised, because there was a note on the logbook that she had said she was going up north to visit her with her father.
While the local community and the American military are now asking themselves how a young family could be left to die alone like this, the police are still awaiting the results of further post-mortem examinations, which they hope will explain the cause of Mrs. Volker's death and answer at least one of the questions posed by this tragedy. Paul Davies, ITN, Kirtling.
The Barlow Clowes fraud trial started this afternoon with a prosecution claim that Peter Clowes lived the high life on other people's savings. Clowes and 3 others are accused of stealing nearly £17 million following the collapse of their fund management empire. The prosecution said it was a case of flagrant fraud conducted on a massive scale.
Peter Clowes looked relaxed as he left for court this morning with his wife and stepdaughter. How are you feeling, Mr. Clowes?
Very well, thank you.
He was arrested 3 years ago, and the start of his trial was delayed this year while he spent time in hospital. But their arrival at the court was far from relaxed, a scrum of photographers for a time blocking the way. 2 former investors headed a queue waiting to see the trial. They, like others, lost money, but were later compensated by the government. Mr. Alan Suckling, QC, for the prosecution, said that Mr. Clowes and the 3 other defendants had stolen money from investors and bought houses, farms, yachts, cars and antique furniture. Mr. Clowes, the court heard, was the mastermind of the Barlow Clowes organisation. He was the driving force and instigator of the fraud. He used investors' money to fund the business activities and lifestyle of a millionaire. The trial continues tomorrow. Hugh Pym, ITN, Central London.
Nelson Mandela accused the South African government today of talking peace while waging war against the country's black population. He urged ANC members to defend the lives of their people and said the fight to end white supremacy was not over.
The revered leaders of the African National Congress, Oliver Tambo and Nelson Mandela, take the stage at the organisation's first conference on South African soil for 30 years. But while the acclaim for these men is absolute, other members of the old guard are facing a challenge to their leadership from younger men like Miners leader Cyril Ramaphosa. The ANC should emerge from this conference with a younger, more dynamic leadership. Their task will be to transform the organisation into an effective political party, and so strengthen Nelson Mandela's hand in his negotiations with the white minority government. Mr. Mandela, who will take over from Mr. Tambo as ANC president this week, addressed the crucial issue of violence and said it must not be allowed to slow their march to freedom.
We should not allow the situation whereby those who deliberately inject violence into our communities succeed in their intention of slowing down the process leading to the democratic transformation of our country.
The ANC, Mr. Mandela said, should get ready for government. Kevin Dunn, ITN, Durban.
A Manchester store detective told a court today how she watched the TV presenter Richard Madeley shoplifting twice in 1 week. The second time, she says he left the Tesco store without paying for £55 worth of champagne, wine and gin. Mr. Madeley, who co-hosts the ITV programme this morning, denies the charge.
Richard Madeley, accompanied by wife and co-presenter Judy Finnegan, came to court this morning for the second day of his trial, in which prosecution witnesses described how he'd walked out of a supermarket without paying for £55 worth of wines and spirits. It was alleged that at the Tesco's near his home in Didsbury, Greater Manchester, he had paid for his groceries but left with the bottles unpaid for in the front of his trolley. Mrs. Angela Orme, a security officer employed by Tesco's, told how she'd seen him put empty carrier bags on top of the bottles of alcohol, though she agreed under cross-examination that he hadn't been trying deliberately to cover them up. Mr. Madeley's explanation at the time of his arrest was read out in court. It was, he said, a pure and simple oversight. He described how before leaving he'd checked the menu in the Tesco's cafe. "I didn't exactly make a speedy escape with my illegal booty," he had told police. He went on, "When stopped, I realized with a sort of a lurch I'd left without paying for the wines and spirits, but I was given no opportunity to go back and pay for them." Mr. Madeley himself will give evidence tomorrow. James Mates, ITN, Manchester Crown Court.
The defending Wimbledon champion, Martina Navratilova, got off to a bad start this afternoon in her quarter-final against 15-year-old Jennifer Capriati. She lost the first set before rain set in. Other action today in the women's singles, Graf beat Garrison. And in the men's, Edberg beat an ill-tempered John McEnroe.
The sun shone on what should have been the match of the tournament. 3 times champion of the 80s against present king of Wimbledon. Briefly, the 34-year-old American showed us why he was once rated one of the greatest of all time. The old touch was still there, occasionally. But so too was the old, annoying, argumentative streak we've seen so often over the years. This time the ball did look well out, and his protest wasn't unreasonable.
Saw that ball? The ball is far outside the line.
But when it happened again, the line judge got the sort of abuse that might have got a footballer arrested. After that, there was really no hope for him, especially against a player of Edberg's class. At times, he simply looked silly. It was almost a relief when it ended in straight sets. Edberg is a sportsman as well as a champion. You have to wonder if anyone cares if McEnroe comes back to Wimbledon again. Among the women, no problems for #1 seed Steffi Graf, easily avenging her shock semi-final defeat of last year against Zina Garrison. But potentially the biggest upset of the tournament was on the cards tonight, as 15-year-old Jennifer Capriati took the first set against 34-year-old defending champion Martina Navratilova, she looking distinctly rattled. Giles Smith, ITN Sport, Wimbledon.
Next from ITN, Channel 4 News at 7. From all of us on the 540 team, bye for now. Have a nice evening.
what a mixed up, muddled up day it's been. Temperatures in the 70s and sunshine for the Midlands. More troubles, more rain for Wimbledon. A lot of gloomy weather along the east coast. If you look back and see what's been happening, we've got low pressure close to Ireland and a swirl here, but it's this lot we've got to watch out for. That's been developing and working its way up. That's what's brought the rain to Wimbledon. Just noticed this over Manchester, quite a hefty thunderstorm there just an hour or two ago. Through the night tonight, though, that band of rain working its way steadily northwards and westwards across England, getting into northern England, perhaps Wales through the nighttime period. Somewhat clearer skies coming along behind, allowing some patchy fog for central and southeastern parts of England. Once again, low cloud, drizzle, patches of mist and fog all the way down the east coast, probably about as far south as East Anglia. Further northwest, though, mostly clear. So let's follow that rain through tomorrow. There we are in the morning, northern England down into Wales, beginning to break up, though, by that time. And then through the day, it'll nudge its way into southern Scotland and eventually get across to Northern Ireland, but by that time turning a bit showery, brighter weather following along behind. On either side of that band of rain, while the northwest of Scotland coming off probably best again, dry with plenty of sunshine, staying pretty gloomy though, right down most of that east coast, down as far as the Wash. But central and southern parts of England, quite a bright start after the early morning fog goes, but once again as we go through into the afternoon, those showers breaking out willy-nilly across central and southern parts, the odd one perhaps heavy, still with the possibility of a rumble of thunder. Similar split in temperatures too. The Midlands probably coming off best around 23, 73 degrees Fahrenheit, but you've still got that easterly wind coming in from the North Sea, and that'll keep that coast right on the chilly side. 16, for example, there is a mere 61 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, that's just about it from me. There's the sunset times. Here's a summary.
Hello and good evening. In Thames News tonight, the commuter's dream, up to 35 minutes off journey times to London. A new line across the capital will revolutionise travel. The cost, £1.5 billion.
How battling George Walker's been fighting to get back into the boardroom. Joy for Jimmy as medical first brings him the hope of life. And in court, the man who blew his top over a car alarm.
In sports, Duke Mackenzie's offered $100,000 to fight another Canizales. And McEnroe goes out with a shout, but says he'll return.
A £1.5 billion rail scheme to beat congestion and revolutionise commuting in the capital has been unveiled. The Crossrail line will carry 500,000 passengers a day. For some, it will knock 35 minutes off their journey. And for the first time, it'll link Berkshire and Buckinghamshire in the west with Essex in the east, using a tunnel under central London. Its backers say it's the most important rail scheme for a century. Its critics say the price for faster travel is lost homes, lost jobs and years of disruption. Mike Pearce has this report.
Crossrail is without doubt the most important new rail link for London commuters this century. It should make appalling conditions like these a thing of the past. A new 6-mile tunnel will link Paddington and Liverpool Street, taking trains from Essex, Berkshire and Buckinghamshire direct to tube stations in the city and the West End. 70 new trains will be built to carry 500,000 passengers a day. The cost, £1.5 billion of government cash. Work will begin in 3 years' time and should be complete by 1991.
It'll give us the ability to run trains right across London, east to west, and give people travelling across the region a service that they never had before. It's been a tremendous success in the development of Paris and its business areas, and we're sure it'll do the same in London.
This is how commuters will benefit. A typical journey from Twyford in Berkshire to the West End will be cut by 25 minutes. From Chorleywood there'll be a saving of 14 minutes, and from Gidea Park in Essex to Paddington it should be 13 minutes quicker. But already the route of the new link has sparked off a major row. The tunnel's due to emerge here at Allen Gardens in Shoreditch. Tower Hamlets Council say they'll fight it all the way. This is the only large open space in the most heavily populated area of London. It will be turned into a building site with an endless stream of lorries taking away spoil for up to 5 years. Tower Hamlets Council say it will blight the area, cause misery for residents and jeopardise improvement schemes aimed at creating houses and jobs.
We want them to tunnel all the way to Stratford. We're not against the railway. We are in favour of better public transport for London, but we don't see why the tunnel should come up in an area which is going to cause such disruption to local residents, ruin the environment for years to come, when a much better alternative exists.
In central London, areas like Hanover Square will be dug up and some buildings demolished. There are fears the city will be in chaos for years.
Inevitably, in the central area where we're building stations, there will be some disruption. But we can promise that the product at the end of the day will be something London will be proud of.
A question mark also hangs over a stop at Holborn and if trains from Heathrow will link into the system. But one thing is clear, the link is vital and the sooner it's built the better. This is Mike Pearce for Thames News.
Surgeons at King's College Hospital have made history by carrying out the first split liver transplant. The team have doubled the life-saving potential of a donor liver by splitting it in two and giving each half to a different patient. Tonight, the two people, a boy and a woman, are making good progress. That report coming up.
This is the little boy who's made medical history, 10-year-old Jimmy Evangelista from Lambeth in South London, seen here in King's College Hospital 3 weeks before the pioneering liver transplant. In an operation lasting 12 hours, surgeons at King's divided a liver. Jimmy was given the smaller left lobe, a 40-year-old woman the larger right lobe. It's the first time the operation has been attempted in Britain, but doctors say both patients were desperately ill and only one donor organ was available.
I'd stress that it's really only of value for the emergencies, where the patient will die if they don't get an organ within 1 to 2 days. It does provide a way forward for emergency liver transplants, whereas previously we've had to choose between 2 patients with 1 organ, and that's always awful.
Jimmy has been under King's care for 5 years. He was born with a rare liver disease, but both surgery and an earlier transplant operation were unsuccessful. Doctors are hoping he will now pull through.
He's still critically ill and remains in intensive care, but he was off the ventilator since yesterday, so he's breathing on his own and he's conversant and in fact has been watching television.
The 40-year-old woman patient isn't being named at her family's request. She's said to be doing well, even sitting up in bed, although doctors stress she is still seriously ill. The liver, unlike the heart or kidneys, will grow back if it's divided. Doctors hope the split liver transplant could save many lives.
Oh, indeed. In fact, we have lost many children with chronic liver disease who have not been able to have a transplant in time to save them. This new development could help enormously in the liver transplant programme, well, in this country and throughout the world.
Tonight, both patients are described as serious but stable. Doctors say the next 6 weeks will be critical. This is Kerry Swain at King's College Hospital for Thames News.
The business tycoon George Walker has won his fight to stay on the board of the Brent Walker Leisure Group, at least for the time being. The group's bankers have insisted on his removal as a condition for ploughing £1.5 billion into the financially troubled company. Earlier today, shareholders voted overwhelmingly against moves to remove the East Ender who built the multi-million-pound empire.
The shareholders had received a stark warning from the board: get rid of George Walker or risk the banks pulling the plug on the troubled company. They voted overwhelmingly in favour of the former boxer and against the banks.
These new guys have come in to do the hatchet job, and they haven't done it cleanly, they haven't done it calmly. It's the bankers who should be in the dock today, not the Walker family.
The meeting was told that a multi-million-pound refinancing package from the banks depended on the removal of George Walker, a long-time associate John Hemingway, and Mr. Walker's wife, Jean.
A wonderful family around me. How else can I do but survive?
Mr. Walker has already offered his resignation if he's allowed to see through the rescue plan for the company, but he's not going to go before.
What I can't understand is why the chairman doesn't accept me with open arms and saying, what should we do, George? This is your business plan. How should we, together, convince the banks that it's the right thing to do, and how do we split up the company with the responsibilities for the future?
For the former heavyweight, today was the latest round in his fight to stay with a leisure group which he founded 30 years ago and which owns William Hills. Last month he was deposed as chief executive, and the present chairman is still determined he must go.
It's either there's
the survival of the company and some value for their shares in the future, or complete disaster.
But Mr. Walker has no plans to retire just yet.
I feel I have a great deal to contribute to the company in these troubled times. And to be rid of me is not sensible and is totally wrong.
There's likely to be another meeting called and another attempt to oust him. George Walker is promising another fight. Rob McBride for Thames News.
Bus crews in parts of London are to go on strike on Thursday. 350,000 passengers in East, North East and Central London will be hit by the 24-hour stoppage. It's in protest over pay cuts of up to 20%. The strike got the go-ahead from union leaders this afternoon. London Forest Buses management say the cuts are the only way to stay competitive.
2 boys have been expelled from Eton College in a drug scandal. The 2 fifth-formers were ordered to leave the public school in Berkshire after staff found small quantities of cannabis in their rooms. One of the 15-year-old boys also had a pipe for smoking the drug. The headmaster, Dr. Eric Anderson, has warned that other boys will face similar severe punishment if they're caught dabbling in drugs.
A North London man who was left paralysed after a car crash 6 years ago has won a damages settlement which could eventually amount to more than £5 million. Athos Chrysanthou, a pastry cook from Tottenham, nearly died after the head-on collision. The High Court award is for £950,000, but under what's described as a structured settlement, he'll receive a guaranteed income for the rest of his life.
Today's High Court settlement guarantees a secure future for Athos Chrysanthou. After the hearing, he returned to his Tottenham home with the family who provided constant care since his devastating car accident in 1986. A head-on collision left him with multiple fractures and severe head injuries. He spent 18 months in hospital. Now, at 31, he's dependent on a wheelchair and, since his marriage ended, upon the physical support of relatives, mainly his mother. He's developed both physical and artificial means of communication using this computer keyboard. He was able to reassure us and the High Court that he followed the hearing and didn't find it distressing. And he had only praise for the support of his family.
You know, it's great to know in the back of our minds that I haven't got to worry about that he will be without or he won't be looked after.
Despite the apparent magnitude of the settlement, the court stipulated that Athos Chrysanthou should be the sole beneficiary of a £950,000 lump sum. It's been paid by the insurers of the other driver, who denied liability but agreed to damages. After investment, Mr. Chrysanthou will receive the costs of care every year for the rest of his life. In 30 years' time, that could top £5 million. In court, Mr. Justice Rose praised the excellent care he'd received from the family. He said he had no hesitation in approving the settlement. The family told the court they'll move with their brother into a new, better-equipped home. And tonight, they say the judgment gives them long-term peace of mind and encouragement to the families of other accident victims. Jonathan Ray, Thames News.
38 years after teenager Derek Bentley was hanged for the murder of a London policeman, a new campaign is being launched to win him a pardon. Derek Bentley was sentenced to death after the shooting during a warehouse robbery in Croydon. Tonight, MPs will see a new film which throws fresh doubt on his conviction. And for his sister, it's the latest stage in a long battle to clear his name. Jane Ball now reports.
In the austere world of post-war London, the murder of PC Sidney Miles by a teenage gunman on the roof of a Croydon warehouse provoked a public outcry. But there was even greater outrage when Derek Bentley, a mentally handicapped 19-year-old, was hanged for the killing. It was his accomplice, Christopher Craig, then just 16, who held the gun and fired the shot that killed the policeman. He was injured jumping from the roof and only escaped the death penalty because of his age. Derek Bentley was found guilty of murder. The police claimed he incited Craig to pull the trigger after he was arrested on the rooftop.
Let him have it, Chris!
Those words, "let him have it," Chris, led Derek Bentley to the gallows. But fresh evidence has emerged which challenges the police version of events and clears Bentley of any part in the killing. Now a feature film called Let Him Have It is being made about the murder. MPs will see a special preview of the unfinished film tonight as part of the campaign to exonerate Derek Bentley.
The circumstances were outrageous in 1953. There was a public outcry at the time, but we were a less civilised and tolerant society of misjustice in those days, and now I think we can't bring him back, but at least we can rectify a grave injustice to the Bentley family.
Bentley's sister Iris, who's campaigned tirelessly for the past 38 years to clear her brother's name, believes the film could be a breakthrough.
All the truth is really coming out now. I mean, even a policeman said that Derek didn't shout out on the rooftop, and I believe that policeman more than the other police.